Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Hello and welcome to Sgwrs. This episode is hosted by the literacy team and today we'll be discussing comparative judgment. We're thrilled today to be joined by Lucy Thomas from Cyfarthfa High School and Michelle Bennett from Cardiff High School, who will be sharing their experiences and reflections. So in 2020, CSC funded 40 schools in the region to take part in a comparative judgment pilot for assessing primary writing and secondary baseline writing. I'm wondering, Lucy, if you'd mind explaining what comparative judgment is and why it's so helpful for those schools who perhaps haven't heard of it before.
Yes, of course. Comparative judgment aims to eliminate the human error of judgment when it comes to assessing work. So if you were to ask two different English teachers to assess a piece of work using mark criteria, there is quite a high likelihood that they might come to slightly different marks. Yeah. However, if you had the same two teachers and you asked them to look at two pieces of writing and judge which one was best, there's a much greater percentage chance that they're going to come to an agreement as to which is the better piece of writing. And that's basically what comparative judgment does. It takes out this discrepancy between marking. It relies on many of these very quick, easy judgments to be made at both school level and national level, which then produces quite accurate, reliable data in terms of pupil performance.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the company that run it, No More Marking, sort of state that it's more reliable than sort of GCSE marking, don't they? Because it's sort of moderation crowdsourced on a huge scale, isn't it? Michelle, I was sort of wondering if you could talk us through how you administered it in school and what the experience was like for pupils.
Yes, of course. So we were very, very fortunate, obviously, to be part of this pilot, and No More Marking actually created some pre-made resources for teachers and some stimulus for the pupils as well. So we literally used the resources as they were. We were very aware of sometimes when we get children to write, we sometimes scaffold to the nth degree. And I was very mindful that we wanted this to be a fair reflection of what the pupils are capable of. So in terms of the administration, it was really, really simple. We had obviously the stimulus materials, and we literally just took 1 hour out of our allocation for English, and we introduced the task, and then we literally let the students complete it within that hour. So they all had the same amount of time. And again, the ready-made stimulus materials were used across all of the classes, and it inevitably meant that the children had lots of freedom, which was brilliant for their creativity. Whether they conform to the task is debatable, but these are young students, and their writing was just so lovely to read afterwards anyway.
And of course, they'd been out of school for a very long time when they did the baseline back in November, hadn't they? So
yes, they had. Yes,
Lucy,
it was.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, it literally was. I think they did it with us in the first couple of weeks of September, so it was literally the first experience of high school, bless them, to some extent, was having a go at this writing task. But then as a result, we did get it an early picture of their ability, which is obviously very useful for us as they were coming in post-lockdown.
Hugely. And did the children find it okay? I mean, I know in meetings that we've had about comparative judgment, we've reflected on perhaps there being some kind of transition effect, the move from primary to secondary, and writing being different. Did the pupils, how did they find the process? Lucy?
I think they were quite intimidated at times. I think obviously it'd been a long time since they'd been in primary school, and certainly I think a number of them were not used to having cold writing tasks in the way that we perhaps do in secondary in terms of end of year tests, etc., even at key stage 3. And perhaps they're more used to a piece of writing being built up to sequentially over a number of lessons with lots of teacher input, perhaps a writing scaffold, which of course we do, but I think they weren't perhaps used to that idea of a cold test. And so it took a little bit of coaxing with a few of our pupils to say, just literally write whatever you think. You can do it. Just give us your opinions.
Was it similar for you, Michelle? Yeah.
Yes, it was very much so. The students were more than happy in terms of completing the extended writing for us, apart from, as Lucy said, maybe a few of them who needed a bit of cajoling. But yes, it was almost this idea of they had too much freedom. They needed a lot of reassurance at the start just to enable them to say, for us to say, it's okay, you can write whatever you want, as Lucy said, because I think in English particularly, we do build it up so much. And I don't know whether there was a possibility of the children worrying about getting it wrong, because this was, for lots of them, as we said, it was, they'd been a long time out of primary school. This was their first real experience of English in high schools, within the first couple of weeks. So I think, bless them, they thought that something awful was going to happen had they not chosen the right career, or had they not used, an adverbial clause to start their sentence, But no, once they got going, they were absolutely fine.
Oh, lovely. I mean, the process is two-pronged, isn't it? That there's a pupil level side to it, where obviously they are completing a written task, but then there's the side for us as teachers and practitioners as well. So for those of you who aren't aware, once the children have completed a writing task, they get scanned off and uploaded into the No More Marking database, and then the practitioners take part in a judging process. I just wonder what your experiences of that judging process were like, Michelle. What did you find interesting about that?
Well, what was really interesting was being able to identify members of my department who didn't have the same views on certain pieces of work. So we were able to track how similar our views were on certain pieces. It gave a numerical score. I'm sorry I can't explain it in more sort of technical detail, but that's why we need Daisy to explain it to us, not an English specialist. But it was brilliant because you could really see, each marker had a score, each judge had a score, and you could see basically if their score was higher than the others in the department, and we could see if people were harsh or if they were too generous perhaps in the rankings. And I think that's brilliant in terms of now when we're coming up to obviously CDGs and we're going to be doing lots of marking and lots of moderation. It's really reaffirmed for me the importance of moderation and doing that sort of pre-marking experience. Yeah. Because for lots of us, as Lucy, you said at the beginning, English is such a subjective subject that lots of people look at a piece of written a written task in such a different way. So for us, it's really sort of honed in on the importance of our QA, our quality assurance processes in school.
That's really interesting. Lucy, what about yourself? How did you find the judging process in Cyfarthfa?
I have to say, I think the whole department really enjoyed it, actually. we had about 10 members of staff involved in the judging process. And obviously, it seems daunting when you see how many judgments you have to make, and it's something like, I think we had about 180 judgments each we had to make, and you think, oh, that sounds, very daunting. But actually, the judgments, I think the highest average was 30 seconds in a department for each judgment, and it went down to about 12 seconds the judgments were being made. So actually, I think in the end, it was a lot quicker to assess and to mark than it would be if we were actually trying to apply level criteria, for instance, and make that judgment of, 5A, 5B, 5C. It was quite quick and easy. And we did have 2 non-specialists involved in the judging process, and they felt very confident in doing it as well. So I think, if you are a department where you have non-specialists involved, it does make it more accessible for them then, and create that confidence in the assessment.
That's great. Michelle, I can see you want to make a point.
Yes, just very, very similar things to Lucy there. And for us, our department, we found it hard at first because we are so used to poring over a piece of work, and this idea of working really quickly and giving a more holistic, snap judgment was really hard for some of my department. And for some of them, they were sort of questioning, well, but am I doing the right thing? Just giving this snap judgment. But actually, when they sort of saw the process as it enveloped, or developed even, they did enjoy it. I think, as Lucy said, that the daunting process of doing this for the whole year group at first, they were like, oh, I'd rather have 34, extended essays. But then actually, the time it took to compare all the year group compared to one class, it was so much quicker.
That's brilliant. So moving on to then the results, which were interesting. I suppose we'll say that they were interesting. So for those of you who aren't aware, the pupils come out of this with a writing age, which is great because we've had reading ages for a long time, but we haven't had writing ages. And also the data that you get as a school and then as a region is how you compare to other schools and how you compare nationally. So just want to ask you both, did the results shock you at all? Michelle's nodding her head.
Michelle, I am sorry. I forgot this is a podcast and not people can't see me. Yes, the results were quite startling. We expected that the children's writing ages to be lower because of the sort of coronavirus situation. Of course, we expected that time away from school to have an impact. I just couldn't really believe how vast the gap is between some students writing ages and their chronological age. As you said, we've had data about their reading ages for many years, and when we compare now our current year 7's reading ages compared to their writing ages, some of them are much weaker in the writing area, and that is quite
we
shocking.
Wouldn't have had that information before, would we?
No.
I suppose it's worth bringing in context that nationally there had been a regression in writing by 22 months. That's what the project found, and in Wales that regression was even steeper. So it was quite a sharp decline in writing standards. Lucy, what about you? How did you find the results?
I think they were shocking in a way. I think we had been anticipating that writing ages would be lower than perhaps our reading ages. I think for a number of years we felt as a department that there'd been a decline in perhaps writing, especially since perhaps the introduction of national reading tests, etc. And there's always been a heavy focus nationally on reading in a way that writing wasn't assessed and tracked in the same way nationally, because we don't have a national writing test. But I think when we saw, we had a large proportion of pupils whose writing ages were below their chronological ages, and it really did suggest to us, how much we needed to address writing and really make that a focus. In particular, I think what we noticed was the errors with sentence structure, run-on sentences, comma splicing. And I think, Michelle, going back to what you said, I think perhaps because of those nerves some of the pupils had about worried about doing it right or doing it wrong, they were just so focused on different elements that they just literally, it just came as an outpouring from them because they had this freedom and creativity, and it was almost like a monologue in some senses with some people. So it was just coming forth from them. And I think, that control really of the writing is one of the things that we really felt that came out of it that we need to focus on as department.
And I think regionally, that was very clear to us regionally when you looked at samples from across, all of the schools that participated. That's a similar message we were picking up. I think perhaps it's also interesting to share with you that, we had very different schools taking part in the pilot, and yet the statistical range of the writing was very narrow, meaning that there was no difference really, depending on what school they were going to in terms of the standards of writing, which is quite interesting. So obviously, I know we did this back in November, and we all had, we met and we talked about what we were going to do as a result, and then of course we went into lockdown again. So I'd love to ask, what have you done with the information so far? But it might be what will you do with the information so far? So I don't know if, Michelle, I can come to you first.
Well, it is very much a case of what are we planning to do, Catherine, at the moment. But one thing that we really want to focus on, like Lucy said, is about crafting, the art of crafting a sentence. So we're really keen to look into mastery of grammar. as a school, our maths department employ a mastery approach with year 7. And it's something that we are looking to sort of get some experience of from them. And I think it's really important that, we do spend that time and master, even just what is a sentence, because as we all know, when we come to year 11, some of those children still do not know how to write a full sentence, and I think this has perhaps brought home this need of spending real time and energy, just making sure that they fully understand how to write. I know all of us, have some fantastic schemes of work, across the consortium, because we're very open and we share a lot, and sometimes we are so keen to share some fabulous literature with the students, get them reading different complex texts that I think sometimes we almost skim over the writing bit, really. And I think, and don't get me wrong, I am a little bit daunted by the thought of spending, a long time on how to write a sentence, but yeah, I am actually very excited about that process. And one of the things that we've looked at already is, looking what's already out there. So, I know lots of people who are going to listen to this today now are followers of Lindsay Skinner, and her sort of crafting brilliant sentences, whole sort of pack and booklet that you can buy. So we're looking at that, and we're looking, as I said, at how maths departments and other sort of schools have developed their mastery program. And so it's going to be a time of change, I think. But why not? Curriculum for Wales is coming, and this is a brilliant time to sort of have a rethink about what we want to do and what's going to have a real impact on these kids. We can't catch them up, because of course, the time is gone, but what can we do to make sure that every English lesson is as effective as it can be, when they're in front of us?
It sounds like you're sort of saying you're thinking of slowing the writing process down. And, I don't know if you've listened to the previous podcast where we've talked about, often we're guilty of setting writing tasks rather than teaching writing. And it's flipping that switch again. Then it sounds like you're sort of saying then, Michelle. What about you, Lucy?
We did use it in a way that we haven't had, because we haven't had this data before. So we've always used the National Reading Test, for instance, to guide us on pupils who may require additional intervention for literacy. But we did actually use it to create specific intervention groups on writing this time for those pupils who were falling, with writing ages below 7 years of age. We felt very passionately that they needed, obviously, intervention for that as quickly as possible. And actually, on the back of it, we were so impressed with how easy it was to conduct the administrative side and the valuable data that we got. We were actually lucky in applying and being successful to be on the Improving Writing pilot project, which No More Marking is running. So we're hoping to have a look at that and roll that out after Easter now. Obviously, with lockdown, we felt as if it wouldn't get the best uptake. But similar to what Michelle was saying, really looking at, in the long term, I think we're looking at things like the writing revolution and starting, like you say, that's this slow crafting of writing. And also the explicit teaching of perhaps separate linguistic lessons. So it's interesting. I think we went through a phase where we were told very much that we should be always integrated as part of a normal lesson. They shouldn't be discrete lessons. But I think more and more now we're feeling as if it needs both. There should be discrete lessons where we're looking at syntax or subjects and predicates or whatever other linguistic feature we want to look at. And that then this is developed and built upon in the literature lessons where we reflect on, as you were saying, Michelle, a good piece of literature and saying, look at how they've used, that clause within that sentence and the effect of that. And so that, you say, the crafting, the explicit lessons, but then supported throughout the whole curriculum to really try to encourage that crafting in their own writing.
Definitely. I mean, you're talking there about the impact that it's had, particularly on your schools. What about broader than that? Say, for example, across clusters. Have you shared your experiences at all with your feeder primaries, or are you looking at any sort of cluster developments as a result of the pilot? Michelle?
Well, we've not yet, unfortunately, been able to obviously arrange a time where we can sit down and really unpick it properly. But we are intending to share it with our clusters, and we're hoping to sort of strengthen our links really, and really think about, with obviously the introduction of curriculum for Wales, the learning sort of steps and things, and hoping to sort of get a continuum from year 6 into year 7 more aligned really, because as you said, there is always this sort of dip, isn't there, historically. So I think definitely we are going to share what we've discovered, not as any sort of punitive thing and say, oh look, this is what we found when they were with us for 2 weeks, but more as a how can we work together to ensure that we are teaching them how to craft writing in a coherent way. So yes, so we plan to do it. We haven't done much yet, unfortunately.
What about you, Lucy? Have you done any sharing?
Yes, we have. I believe that it was taken to head teachers conference within our cluster, and so the data has been shared with the head teachers, because obviously, I've worked closely with many of my primary colleagues over the years. They're excellent practitioners in literacy, and obviously they all care, as we all do, about where these pupils are travelling to. Is the journey, isn't it? Not the end destination. And so they want them to see them succeed. They love to hear how they've got on at GCSE, etc. And they obviously want to feed into that picture. So I think, sharing this data is very important, but also working together. And as you've said already, Michelle, the perfect opportunity now with the new curriculum developments to really work with our primaries to have a robust plan for the teaching of writing. That's the same approach across primary schools, and then into the same with the secondary schools, and a chance to really unpick what we need to address as a cluster, so that we can ensure that these pupils are making the progression that we ultimately all want them to make.
You've segued perfectly there into my last question, which is actually about curriculum for Wales. So, thinking ahead, we're in the engagement phase at the moment of curriculum for Wales, and the vision setting and the development. So we're not really thinking about the what, we're thinking about the why and the how. So do you think comparative judgment, or how do you think, a comparative judgment could support you in developing your curriculum for LLC? Lucy?
I think it's massive, really. Obviously, it's about literacy across different languages. So, looking at linguistics and sentence structure in terms of French, in terms of Welsh and English, and looking at, as is explicitly telling us to, these grammatical structures of sentences. But also, it actually says in the new curriculum document that how are you going to ensure, when you're looking at the planning phase, that all learners are able to continue to progress despite different starting points. And I think that's where this data feeds in. We've got what their starting points are, so that we can use that to ensure that they are getting what they need in order to progress, throughout their school journey. And that track, we're signed up again to redo it in May, so hopefully we'll see
us too.
Fabulous. The progress that the pupils have made, and then also to reflect as ourselves then, if they haven't made the progress we have. I know we've had another lockdown, but what can we do to try to ensure that we get them to where we want them to be?
We have, and I don't think we can underestimate as well the impact that blended learning specifically has had on writing, because so much of it has been done through a screen. Absolutely. Certainly, not a huge amount of writing experiences have happened. Michelle, what about yourself?
Very similar to what Lucy said. Really, it's about getting together with, the whole sort of faculty of LLC, and really working together. Because my colleagues, and I'm sure Lucy will say the same, their expertise with linguistics and syntax and everything is absolutely wonderful. I just think, again, we've got this situation where pupils go from lesson to lesson and they don't employ the same skills, or they don't employ the same strategies that are now a knowledge, Kath, that they bring to them, or bring with them, to French and German and Welsh, and they come into English almost as if it's a foreign language. So it's certainly something that we can explore, and I'm just really, really keen to just learn from how as Lucy said, about how her cluster do it, and how other departments do it. But we have also spoken about stepping outside of our sort of LLC area, and also thinking about bringing on board more of our humanities colleagues, because so many of their extended writing tasks, even if it is sort of, even just Key Stage 3, they have creative writing tasks, like write a newspaper, front page of a newspaper for history, or write an article for a newspaper about something they've learned in geography. And I think, again, if we can perhaps bring in some of the strategies and some of our expertise to them, again, that can only help, can't it? It can only help bolster the kids with their learning journey.
Definitely.
Definitely.
So that brings us to the end of our episode for today. A huge thank you to Lucy and Michelle, who I'm sure must be absolutely frazzled with all the planning for centre determined grades at English departments are going through at the moment. So a huge thank you to them. If you'd like to find out more about comparative judgment, then obviously please feel free to contact me, and you can follow us on Twitter at CSC_literacy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Diolch am wrando ar y benod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tanysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.